Scripts families, this is Miss Heather and I'm here to show you how to prepare cutting materials at home. We sent home a sample of cutting materials, but if your children love to cut at home as much as they do at school, you're going to run out really fast. I know some of you don't have printers at home, so I'm going to show you how to make it without a printer. But for anything that I do, if you make it on a plain white piece of paper, and then you can just copy it in a printer onto colored paper for your children. What you're going to need for this is a piece of construction paper, a pre-cut strip that's less than 1 inch. This one's about 3/4 of an inch. And an even smaller one that's about a half to maybe a 1/4 inch. And then I made a template, and these are for doing zigzags and wavy lines. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be making some paper with straight lines, even some on the diagonal, wavy lines, and zigzag. The first thing we want to do, especially if we're going to make a template that can be copied on a printer, is to create the right sized paper. Cutting work involves manipulating both hands, so the child cannot usually work easily with a full-sized paper. We need to cut it smaller. So I'm going to start first by folding this paper in half, and then in half one more time. Now for children who are cutting lines, this may even still be too big, so I'll show you how we can manipulate it and make it smaller. The next thing I'm going to do, for those of you that do not have a printer, is I'm going to cut along these two lines. So for this material, we're going to use our less than 1 inch strip of paper and a Sharpie. For children who are just starting to cut on lines, we want to use a thick Sharpie, but you can make it more challenging for other children by using a thinner or finer point Sharpie, making the line finer. I'm going to line my strip up against the edge, and then I'm simply going to trace. For a child who's ready for more challenge, we can use this with a thinner line. Again, line it up on the edge. Now, some children, this will still be too challenging because the paper is too big. So one way to reduce the challenge is to cut the paper in. I have a paper cutter that I'm going to use. You can use scissors too. I'm just going to line the paper up approximately in the middle. This reduces the complexity because now when the child goes to cut, the scissors can cut all the way through one strip. There's no moving of the paper. It can work even for more lines when the child likes to cut more lines on the paper. Now I'm going to show you how to do diagonal lines. This time we want to use our thinner strip of paper. I'm going to line it up on the corner. And then use each subsequent line as a guide to make parallel diagonal lines on the paper. Just like with our straight parallel lines, this can still be quite challenging for some children because it would require them to slide the paper. And this sliding motion requires coordinating both hands at the same time. So, to reduce the level of challenge for children who want to cut diagonal lines but have not mastered sliding the paper yet, we can also cut this paper in half. Now when the child goes to cut the diagonal lines, the scissors can cut through in almost one motion. The amount of sliding is minimized. Now I'm going to show you how we can make a wavy line paper template. I have my sample here, and I want to line it up. I want to remember that my line should not hit the top of the paper. There should still be a little bit of space. The level of complexity for the child depends on how far apart the curves are. Curves that are farther apart are easier than curves that are very close together. I'm going to make these a little bit further apart. Just like with the other ones, if a child wants to start practicing curves, but manipulating the whole paper is too much, this one can also be cut in half to make a thinner strip of paper. Let's make some zigzags now. I'm going to start with my zigzag template. and when I put it on the paper, I don't want it to be so close to the top that I cut off the line. The children need to follow the line to cut. Just like with curvy lines, the closer the zigzags are together, the more challenging and complex the cutting work. Just like with the other materials, if holding the whole paper is too difficult, we can cut it in half to make it a smaller strip. One other thing that I enjoy showing older children who have mastered the zigzag is how to make a fringe. To make a fringe, we're going to cut on the zigzag, but when we get to this point, we're going to stop so they all stay attached. It's important for this presentation to really show them how to stop. Usually during the presentation, we won't really talk. And then at the end, I would hold it for them and say, "This is a fringe." Last thing, children find it really fun to cut out different shapes. So after they've mastered all of these different kinds of shapes and done the spiral, you can look for shapes around the house. This is one of the bookends that was in my daughter's room, and I used it to trace on some paper. A couple things to be very careful about. Again, the paper needs to stay relatively small, even for that older child. They need to be able to manipulate and turn it. The bigger the paper it gets, the more likely they are to tear it instead of cut it. So there's two ways to handle that. One would be to trace it onto some white paper over here and then just reduce it on your printer, scanner, copier. Another is to do your best in positioning it on the paper. Trace as much as you can. Then just make sure you go in and fill in the lines so that they connect as best as you can. Daisy.